To go live. Hey everybody. Welcome to the GSO workshop with Brian Yam. This is a concept art, but not exclusive, right? So if it's not concept art only, if you have any questions for Brian Yam, his opinions and his advice, being in the industry for so long. So we'll start off with kind of going the format of today's session. So we'll spend the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Brian, you'll go through your, if you don't mind going through your resume a bit, just to introduce yourself, your experience, what you do, and all that. And then we'll go through the feedback. A lot of the students have posted some of their thumbnails just for you to look at. And after that, we might try something different. I might invite some of you guys, if you want, into this hangout with us so you can ask him and have a conversation with them, so you're not talking through me all the time. So if you want to do that, just post your Gmail account on the #member. That way I can invite you through this. So without further ado, again, if you don't want to jump in, we're still looking. He has access to the Discord, so he is able to read whatever you're writing. He'll answer the questions accordingly. So without further ado, Brian, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Yam, and I am currently a senior concept artist at Amazon Game Studios. I am currently working on our game called Breakaway. That's a esports game that Amazon is developing. You could catch that on Twitch, and we have play sessions every Thursday, or actually broadcast every Thursday, like an esport.
Mm-hmm.
So check that out. So my history and my resume. I graduated from Art Center College of Design back in 2001. So it's quite a long time ago. Yeah, I'm pretty old. Before that, I was studying to be a pre-med. I was going to go into biology and science, but because I love video games a lot, and I also like films like Star Wars, I think that's the one film that kind of got me into this whole thing in the first place. So I decided to change careers after I graduated from UC Santa Cruz. I did work in the biology field for a couple of years, but more than ever, it confirmed my passion was in art, so I pursued that. So after I graduated, I started working for a game company called Insomniac Games. I worked on some of the titles you may know, the Ratchet and Clank titles, Resistance 1 and 2. And I've been there for about 6 years. And then I decided to move on because I thought that I wasn't growing as much. It was my first job, so I was still hungry for more knowledge. So I decided to want to try out film animation. And that landed me in at Imaji Animation Studios in Sherman Oaks, where the project was Gatchaman. I don't know if you remember Gatchaman or Space Science. No, is it Space Team Science Ninjas or something?
Right.
Or Battle of the Planets. That's another. I think that was another title for that. So it's basically anime of 5 superheroes. So we were working on that for the 3D animation. So I jumped on that, but then the studio closed, and then I did some freelance for a while, and then eventually I went to Naughty Dog, worked on Uncharted 2.
Nice.
After I finished that, I was hired at Disney, Walt Disney Image Movers, headed up by Doug Chang.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know who Doug Chang is. He's the design supervisor for Star Wars episodes 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's working on a new Disney park as well. So he's involved in that stuff. And after that, I went to Spark Unlimited, where I worked as a lead concept artist at on Lost Planet 3, and that's why I met Brandon. And after that, and I went to Amazon. Here I am. So
Nice. Awesome, man. So of course you had a wealth of experience. Hopefully you guys are taking advantage of this and ask all the questions you can. Let's just go ahead and go to the feedback. So a lot of the students pinned their artwork.
Okay.
If you want to pull it up or share your screen, if you don't know how to do that, you just go on the left on Hangout. There's like a green icon. It says screen share. If you want to just look at the work and
okay,
do that at the same time.
Okay, I never used this one before. Screen share, or where is it? So is it on the left?
Yeah, it's on the left. There's like a little thing that pops up when you hover. You see it?
So on the very left.
Yeah, on the window. Yeah, Google Hangout window.
Members. Okay.
Well, I can screen share mine if you want to do that instead.
Yeah, maybe that would be. Yeah, okay. I'm not too familiar with this.
I'll do mine.
It's not on the very left, right? I only see 4.
Well, yeah, if you go to the window, there's a black taskbar basically that pops up when you hover, and then there's like the second from the top. There's a green icon that allows you to screen.
Okay, let me close this. Nope, not seeing it.
All right, I'll just go ahead and share mine. And so just tell me which one you're looking at.
Okay.
Here we go. So I'm gonna pin. We'll just go ahead and look at Phillips.
It's a pin?
Yeah.
Pin messages?
Yes, pin messages.
So
we can look
okay, I do see. Okay. All right, I do see. Okay, I have the pin messages up. Is that the one that you want to look at, the thumbnails? And
yeah, we can just look at this one as a start.
Okay.
So this was done mostly from the quick sketch that you did for us a while ago, and so they followed those lessons and kind of.
Okay.
Did this, yeah.
Cool. So just feedback, right?
Right.
Okay. The first thumbnail. I think in terms of the composition, like we're talking about the row of thirds, I think you have that set up pretty well, and overall it's a very decent composition. I'm talking about the line work. I'm looking at the line work right now. And the first thing that pops out in my head right now is the main focal area, which is the three towers. That's a little bit too much. Mm-hmm. So what I would suggest is that you could do one of two things. You could either increase the vertical by a little bit to show more of where the pipes lead down to into the ground. Because right now everything seems to be cropped off. So what you could do is you could actually expand the bottom half down a little bit more so we get more information of where those connecting points are for the pipes. And then also you want to be careful on the top where the points of the towers. You want to make sure that there's no you don't want to create any uncomfortable tangents. So if you look at the third tower, the smaller one out of the 3, the point is barely touching the border. So what you could do is either just one, you could actually scale the whole thing down a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Show the building, show the rest of the building, or what I would do is I would just move the bottom and the top edges out a little bit, so you have a little bit of breathing space for the building and the bottom as well. And also, like right now, you have the foreground, or you kind of have a midground and you have a background. But it would be nice to kind of see where other hints of maybe like more higher mountains, or maybe something that's further out, because right now, even in the value sketch, you just have kind of a foreground, midground, and background. But it'll be nice to, maybe add some more designs, either in the sky. You could do that by adding some interesting cloud shapes, or you could suggest that maybe there's another bigger mountain range in the back, or maybe just a city in the back, or maybe just even a bigger castle in the back. So having all those information will make that environment feel a lot more vast and a lot more rich. So that's my critique for the first one. And I saw that you chose the first one, and rest of them, the bottom one directly below the one of the three little towers. That one I would say it's the compositionally, everything's kind of split right down the middle. So if you draw one vertical line down the middle and one horizontal line across the middle, what you get are 4 quadrants, right? And that's one of the ways that you could see if the composition is exactly dead center, or if it's distributed nicely. So if I were to draw a perfect line down the center and a line across, it would give me crosshairs. The two sides will be split up evenly. So that's what you don't want. Again, what you want to do is you kind of want to follow the rule of thirds, where maybe the two cylinders on the left, the closest one could be a little bit bigger, right? Because by making that one bigger and then having the second one a little bit smaller, you're actually pushing the perspective lines into the center and into the vanishing point. So that's one suggestion. And also, what you could do is you could also move the two cylinders closer to the left. So if you make the closest cylinder closest to us much bigger, and maybe perhaps you might even want to crop it off the edge of the left side of the canvas, and then have the second one, you can also scale that up a little bit, but then in relation to the one that you cropped off, that will still be smaller. Then that will kind of help pull your focus towards the center point. The only question is, like, what is the focal point in this one? I don't really see anything interesting besides the background and the rock. So what are you trying to show here? And also for the right side, like what exactly is that? I know even the thumbnail sketches that I went over to kind of go loose and stuff, but even though if you go loose, you still want to indicate some sort of detail and information on what that object is. For the other two, I could clearly see what type of information I'm looking at. So the one to the right, I could see there's a platform, a tower of a platform, and some refinery structure, right? So that one's very clear. The one above that is also very clear as well. And since we're on the one to the right of the bottom one, that one, actually, the composition there is really nice. The only thing I would say is to actually increase the scale of the tower that's on the right side. Like, since you have it cropped anyway, why not a little bit bigger so you could actually see more detail on the balcony or the platform that's indicated. And then also for the structure on the right, what you could do is scale that down a little bit more. So, and the reason is because we want to help move the eye from right to left, right? So this composition is moving, it's kind of moving in a direction. So right now, what you have are two pretty equal masses, even though the one on the left has a little bit more stuff, but in terms of scale and proportion, they're both pretty even. So my eye is really like trying to focus on, my eyes are really having a hard time focusing on one or the other. So by scaling down the one on the left, the building of the pipes, what you're doing is you're actually redirecting the emphasis of viewing direction back down towards your focal area, which is the one of the pipes. And then the tower itself, that could also, depending on what your focal point is, if you want to make the tower your focal point, then towards the end of the rendering, when you do lighting, that's something that you could focus on with lighting. You could just have the platform be lit and then have the refinery on the left be a little bit more subtle. But also, you want to keep the shapes strong enough so it creates a lot of interest as well. So that's really up to you in terms of how you want to present this in the final. But in terms of composition right now, I would say scale one up and then maybe scale down the other one so that you have a very strong direction when you look at the painting. So your eye exactly, moves exactly, towards the right or the left, right? So in this case, like if I was doing this, I would probably, I would scale down the refinery on the left and then scale up the tower closest to us a little bit up. Actually, I would even crop the whole thing. I would crop the right side as well and just kind of show a piece of the balcony, because I think that could be very interesting as well. And then have that also act as a framing element, right? So a lot of these foreground elements will usually act as a framing element, and the framing element usually helps support the focal area, which is the refinery on the left. So does that make sense? They can't answer back, right?
Well, if they're answering back, they're probably answering back in the Discord channel. So if you can look at that, that'll probably be the best way.
Okay. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. But I think overall the compositions it's a really good start, but you could definitely do some tweaks to make it a lot stronger. So
awesome.
But I think overall, the three strongest ones are the ones on the right, and the one on the bottom left, that's your weakest one.
Awesome.
Also another thing, sorry. The first one that we talked about, the current composition that you have right now is also split right down the middle horizontally. So you're dividing the canvas in two halves, like both vertically and on the top and bottom. They're both pretty even. So if you were to pull up if you were to pull up the top edge or maybe the bottom edge, you could probably readjust it so that the top has a little bit more, proportionally has a little bit more width. So you don't get that 50-50. Same thing with the one at the bottom, you still have that 50-50 split. So you definitely want to be aware of that. So that's all. But I think other than that, it's good stuff.
Sweet. Let's go ahead and move on to Warmo. He has
Warmo, okay.
A thumbnail.
Mushrooms. And okay. Let's see. So if I wanted to screen share this and actually talk over this.
Yes. Do you figure it out yet?
So which no. So okay, so can you show me on your screen share like where it is?
All right. So your picture is gonna do that weird thing, right? So Bear with me, guys.
Yeah.
It's gonna get a little puke worthy here.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not very technically inclined
All right, you see my screen?
or technically savvy.
All right. So you see here on the left side, this green button right here.
That I don't have.
You don't have that one?
Is it? No.
Oh my god.
Let me see. Is there a tab somewhere that I could pull out, or no? I just see. I just see the Games Go Online logo. I see an add button, and then a download apps, and then an exclamation mark that's kind of jumping up and down.
I'll try it again. Let's see.
So I don't.
Interesting. Oh man. All right, we got to fix that. That's not good.
Yeah, I don't see what you're seeing.
All right. Well, I'll continue to just share my, because I'm showing my screen with share, so they are kind of seeing it a bit. If you look at my screen, we'll just do it that way from.
All right. I just can't like point
Draw
to where I'm talking about.
Right.
I guess you try to interpret for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so then top left.
Yeah. Here we go.
Okay, so I see a small city in a, is that a volcano or plateau? Okay, so right now the thumbnail, there's too little information. This is kind of opposite of what we saw earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think compositionally it's actually interesting, but it's just the it needs more information, pretty much. Like I see one line going towards a city, but other than that, like I don't know if it's a high elevation or low elevation. Besides the mountain or volcano next to that. Other information is kind of very lacking. I don't know what the top line, or I mean the bottom line is, the squiggly line in the left bottom corner. I don't know if that's a cliffside or if that's another road. So one thing I wanted to say, so it's if you guys ever go to professional concept art, or even 3D art for that matter, one thing you want to ask yourself whenever you do these thumbnails or these ideas is that if you were to give this sketch to someone and they're asking a whole bunch of questions about it, then that's not a very successful concept or sketch. And that's the question that I always ask myself is, whenever I do a sketch or concept, I always, think in the back of my head, it's like, okay, well, if I were to present this to my art director or to a 3D artist I'm going to hand off, are they going to ask these questions, right? So some of these questions I'm asking right now is something that if I'm a 3D artist and I'm looking at this, like, okay, I'm looking at this, what am I going to model, right? I don't have much information. Maybe the mountain is probably, the most informative piece here, but the rest of it, I don't know what it is. I don't know what this this gray area is. Is it a river? Is it a is it a valley? Is it does it go down into a hole? I don't know. So a lot of open, a lot of questions. So I would maybe spend a little bit more time just putting some more information on here, and just just imagine like if you were doing this yourself, and you wanted to fill out the details, right? I know this is a thumbnail, but you just want to indicate areas of information so that you could kind of look at it and say, okay, I understand what this layout is. Like this is a mountain, and there's a city, but does the city have other roads that lead out to different areas? Is this great thing a river? Does do boats come in? This could be the what you call it, it could be a river next to a city, like what you see in France or London. are there other buildings next to that? So, there's still a lot of unknowns when I look at this. So I would definitely, spend maybe another 20 minutes or so just trying to figure out what that is. And it's okay to use a reference as well. So reference is definitely okay to kind of inform you on what you want to design. Okay, and then let's go to bottom, to run the rocket. Okay, so here again, same deal. I see a rocket. Okay, that's probably the most information I have. That's fine, but what is the scale of the rocket? Right. So another thing is talking about scale. So how big are the mountains in relation to the rocket? Is this rocket a really big rocket, and this is a really small cliffside? What is that dark area there? Is that water, or is that a lake or a hole or a crevice? Again, same issues. Let's go to one on the. Let's go counterclockwise. So this one, get the mushrooms. I think the mushrooms, here it's a little bit better because you have different sizes of scale. So you have, smaller mushrooms. You have big to small and medium. So I use those the big, medium, small. I think for the foreground mushroom on the left side, that one you could actually crop a lot more because you can actually just show the stem and maybe part of the top of the mushroom. Because you already have that information in the midground and the background. So you could totally just crop off the foreground one and use that as kind of a framing element. And also for the ground, the ground, again, you could also use more information on how the ground looks like. A lot of students that I teach, sometimes they forget to leave information on what the ground is, and what happens is that the objects that are sitting on top are floating, right? So there's no grounding at all. So what you could do is, you could define the ground, whether this is, is it a rock surface or is it grass, is it water? But if it's a road, even if you're doing something like a road, that putting a road there has a lot of information because it gives you a sense of perspective as well. If you're doing doing small rocks, you can have bigger rocks that are coming in more in the foreground, and then some of the smaller rocks that are further away, they kind of diminish in scale. So that's another way that you could indicate that this ground is receding back into the horizon line, and that's going to give you some depth. And then along with the mushrooms that you have here, those are kind of receding back as well. So that also helps in establishing perspective as well. If you look at animations, like really simple animations, a lot of the tricks they use is just repetitive shapes, and these repetitive shapes, they kind of scale as they go back, right? So that's kind of what you're doing here as well. I think this one here is probably more successful. Let's go to the bottom one there, the garage. So this one again, the ground here can actually do a lot of work for you for this comp. What I mean by doing a lot of work is if this is like an interior space, the ground has, if you look at a lot of interior garages and stuff, sometimes they have markings on the ground, or sometimes they have panels in the ground. And these markings and panels, what they do is they help inform also perspective and also how far the space goes back as well. I mean, you have the garage scale to do that already, but I think the ground also will do a lot of that work for you as well, and it will be very clear once you design the ground a little bit more what the space is, and also the ceiling as well. Not exactly sure what's on top of these ceilings. Are they lights or are they windows? I'm not exactly sure. So again, same issue around like maybe spend just a little bit more time defining what these panels are. You don't have to go super tight. It's just that you want to indicate to a point where there's really no questions about what this is, right? You can, like, for example, you can indicate like really simple, when you're doing like trees, you can indicate very simple shapes. And if someone looks at that, they could say, oh yeah, there's a tree. Or like what you have in the garage here, I could tell there's a tank, there's a truck, pickup truck, and some other supplies. But in terms of the other environments, like I don't know necessarily like how this space is constructed. So you might want to have like cross beams, perhaps, that just like an interior. If this is like a military base, for example, like if you do some research on that, maybe they might have cross beams, and the cross beams are really nice because they give scale as well, and they're very repetitive shapes. And if you repeat them down a line, you could get that depth and that perspective of how far it goes back very quickly. So, so I think that's all for this this page here. Okay, there's mushrooms. So again, like I'm gonna have the same comments on the ground as well. So the ground right now is lacking a lot of information. So here you have a swing set, which is cool because that gives me an idea of how big this mushroom is. But in terms of where it connects, I'm not sure if I buy that because they're just kind of hanging on the gills of the mushroom. So maybe you might want to think about maybe there's like some sort of like stick or pole that the swing is tied around. But right now when I look at this, I don't really buy how the swing is attached. And also you can make this mushroom like just supersize it, make it really big, make it into the foreground, and then you could actually do something special with the swing as well when it's hanging down. And as the one in the back, you have some small, medium, and large shapes, which is fine. But I think it'd be more interesting if you actually added, like on the left side here, if you add maybe like a forest of mushrooms, cluster them into one area, and then have the middle area be a little bit more sparse, and then maybe some area, again, like have a little bit more clusters as well. So that way you could make up the composition will be a little bit more interesting instead of having like 2 here, 2 in the middle, and 2 on the right side. Right. So again, that's kind of like very methodical and almost very predictable. So in nature, you have something that they're kind of clustered as a group, and then you have some areas that are a little bit more sparse, and maybe some areas that have a little bit more cluster, but the cluster on the other side is not as big as the one on the right side. So again, you might want to look at some references for that as well if you're stuck. And I think in terms of the thirds, that follows the rules. But in terms of adjusting proportions, that's something that you want to play with. You want to scale something up, make something really big, and then have the middle one maybe a focal point. And if the middle one's going to be a focal point, maybe you want to add something that's interesting on top of it. Maybe there's like maybe there's some tables, or maybe there's, I don't know, maybe whoever uses the swing, maybe they're elves. Maybe they have some sort of like, canopy or tent that they go there to kind of rest, or maybe a hammock. I don't know. Something that's interesting that kind of tells a story, right? So a lot of these thumbnails, sometimes you want to kind of tell the story of what this place is. Like, is this something that's very fancy, or is this something that's, very realistic? if it's something that's very fancy, then you want to kind of push some of the fantastical elements by introducing some real unique shapes. Maybe you have, I don't know exactly off the top of my head what would you add, but you maybe want to add some under vegetation that has a very interesting shape as well. Like maybe there's leaves that kind of curl, what you find in like you know uh, like a fairy landscape or something like that, right? Um, so add secondary elements to kind of help complement the the main elements, which is the mushroom. Um, these thumbnails are supposed to be, just really big exploratory ideas and process. So just don't be afraid to go crazy. Don't worry about making something. Don't be too safe. Just go nuts, because this is a time and place to really go crazy with all your ideas, bad or good. So don't be too conservative. That's what I'm saying.
All right. I think we can just go ahead and go to some of the questions that we got. A few students that couldn't make it to the live session, but they're going to watch this later.
Sure.
So I think Warmo asked a few questions here that maybe you can just answer it.
Okay.
Maybe I'll repeat it, and then you go ahead.
Okay. Question for Brian Yam. I thought I saw that somewhere. Let's see here.
So the question is, where do you get inspiration for your concept art? What portion of that of your drawing is given to you in directions from your client, boss, whatever, versus from yourself? Are you just really creative, or do you get inspired by other artists or other media, etc.? I think that is one of my biggest struggles, just coming up with details to fill in the main ideas I have.
Yeah, I'm just very creative. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm human. I get stuck a lot. So when the art director or the creative director gives me like a direction or just a very general theme, well, what I do is I panic, first of all, and what I do is one of the inspirations. Usually we get a lot, like a few days to really think about it. So what we do is you could get inspiration from anywhere. You could get from film. You get from other artists as well. You get from nature. So pretty much anywhere, right? So a lot of the things is, first off, what's the theme, right? So I'll use an example from work. So in Breakaway, a lot of the arenas and a lot of the stories initially was based off of mystical locations, right? And mystical legends. An example would be like El Dorado, City of Atlantis, Styx. You guys are familiar with that, right? So those have been done like for many, many years, hundreds of years, right? Those stories have been recycled and regurgitated and stuff. So that's already a big challenge to get inspiration, because it's been done so many times. So what we did for, let's see, I'll talk about El Dorado since that one's public. So El Dorado, the city of gold, right? So as many of you know, you guys probably saw a lot of movie versions of that, of what El Dorado is, like the DreamWorks movie El Dorado, that, the lost city of the Aztecs, right? Or the Mayans, or whatever, South America. So one of the challenges was, okay, well, we could take that theme, El Dorado, and kind of spin it on our own, right? And make it interesting, make it unique for our own game, right? So how are we going to do that? So when I was first starting, so I was obviously going through the very typical research is, just going through Pinterest, Google, and just looking for different images of Aztec cities, El Dorado. So you have, in a way, it's almost like it's almost like an inevitable process when you're giving a theme and then you do your research. You're always going to hit something that's very generic and very predictable, but you kind of have to go through that in order to get out of that, and then more I wouldn't say original ideas, but more fresh ideas kind of come in, and they start filling your mind, right? Because you already gone through like all the typical crap that you're expected to kind of follow. So you kind of have to go through that first, and it could be painful sometimes, but a lot of times, I like to kind of look outside the box as well, right? So El Dorado, I know it's the city of gold, I know it's Aztec, but I could also think outside the box. Like, okay, what if I don't follow the Aztec architecture, but I follow something that's maybe has a more organic shape, or maybe if you study Aztec and Mayan architecture is very square, right? So part of what I was doing is like, well, what if I break that rule by maybe like this Aztec civilization was so advanced that they discovered some sort of like technology like electricity, but how would they mine electricity during that time, right? So we're looking at tuning forks, right, at the time. So tuning forks is another thing where you think outside the box, where it's like, okay, I'm not going through the typical route, but I'm actually looking at other objects which kind of tie into the lore. And the lore was that at the time we were thinking of these Aztecs because they were kind of appointed by the gods, so they kind of were given like special abilities and special technology. So what kind of ancient tech can you imagine that would exist, right? So tuning forks, gold, right? Gold is the conductor of electricity, right? So now you're starting to like kind of put things together, and by having a lot of different visual shape languages, so what we came up with is we came up with a kind of a semicircular ring. It's almost like a omega, right?
All
so
right.
if you play Breakaway, if you look at the arena, there's these two almost like half rings, and those were the kind of conductors that we the shape language that we developed. And the thing to kind of stick to is you want to still stick to the Aztec theme, right? So whenever you design something that's visually a little bit different and unexpected of what a Mayan architecture is going to be like, you always want to stick with a motif that everyone's familiar with. So the Mayan architecture has a very specific motif, and that's the design of the carving of the stones, right? And the glyphs that they have on the buildings. So if we apply that to some of the shape languages that are not traditionally Aztec or Mayan, but we put that motif back onto the surface of the design, when people look at it, they say, "Oh, okay, that's Mayan or Aztec," because now you still have those carvings on the stone, but the stones are just in different shapes, right? Because in real life, you're never going to see like circular ring structures in Mayan. This is like our take on Mayan, and this is again like we're pushing it more towards fantasy, right? So to answer, I guess I kind of went around, but to answer your questions, the inspiration you get is just look at you could look at the real world references, but if you're going for more fantasy, also look outside the box. Like look at nature. Nature is a very good thing to look at, and also look at anything that inspires you. Film. Good example is Stargate, right? Like that's based on the Egyptian motif, right? But they kind of made it futuristic. So that's kind of the same process that we kind of went through as well. And then for one of our another levels is Atlantis, right? So Atlantis, okay, underwater city, okay, that's super generic. So how can we make Atlantis feel a little bit more of our own? So one of the inspirations that I saw was what's the second movie? This is Chronicles of Riddick,
Right.
Where these civilization, they have these big ships that land.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Riddick movie.
The Necromancers. That's what.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one, I was looking at different references, and I was looking at the Necromancers, technology and interiors. It's like, oh wow, this is pretty cool. Like that's one of the inspirations that kind of helped us develop Atlantis, because for our Atlantis, it's like, okay, what if Atlantis never really sank under the sea or never got destroyed, and they just continued, that civilization kind of continued on their own while the rest of the world's advanced, right? So what would that technology look like if they were to continue, right? So you kind of have to ask yourself questions about that, and then when you ask yourself questions about, okay, what's this technology? How does it work? What if this Atlantean civilization was separated outside from the rest of the world? What kind of stuff would they come up with? So, and those questions that you answer those will be the details that you will be inputting into your design. So you're kind of answering your own questions, right? So if you're ever stuck, ask yourself questions like, okay, I'm making a box. What kind of box is it? Okay, it's it's a Mayan, kind of a death box, right? Like a Pandora's box. Okay, what happens if I open that? How does it open? Does it open? Is it like a traditional box where it just opens one lid, or does it have like a sequence? So all that stuff, write that down, write out your answers, and you may have different answers as well. But all those answers will give you a kind of a list of criteria to follow. And those criteria is going to give you different directions and designs. And then from that point on, when you're doing the thumbnails, those thumbnails will be the answers to your different questions. And then from there, then you could visually see like, okay, well, this visually works, this doesn't. So I'm going to go with this one, and then spin from that even more, right? So basically, just try and push your idea more and more and more, and refine it. So that's the whole purpose about these thumbnails. Is it's just like for inspiration. Like first you're going to ask a question, then you answer your own question. Then the answer will kind of lead you in a direction of where you need to look. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Right. So it's all a lot of baby steps. So
yeah, it's a lot of baby steps, and it take a long time. Research could take up to a few weeks sometimes if you really want to spend the time and to really nail down exactly like what this lore is. And you want to have like, if you don't want to have like loopholes in your story, it's going to take a long time to kind of figure out every little angle. Because people are going to ask questions, right? Okay, well, how does this technology work? Oh, it doesn't make sense. Like, so you got to kind of cover all those questions. But unfortunately, and I think that's probably more for film. For games, people just want to. A lot of times, it just has to look cool, and it has to somewhat make sense. But you don't have to answer a lot of those questions unless it's a very heavily story-driven game. For esports, the arena is a secondary. It's a secondary element. The characters are actually more important in the esports because that's who you're playing. That's your hero, right? The arena is more of a supportive role. So, yeah, you should have a pretty solid question of why this arena is designed the way it is. But in terms of depth, you don't really have to get too deep into it. So it depends on your priorities at that point.
Okay, awesome. There's a student, Praveen, that asked a series of questions, and we have about like 10 minutes left, but we can end it with that. If you mind kind of just going through his list of questions. He also posted his thumbnail if you just want to quickly go over that.
Sure. Praveen, is it?
Praveen, yeah, he's like the fourth one from the bottom.
Is it 3D or 2D?
2D.
Let's see.
I can go ahead and
I don't see it here, but
let me see.
I see a 3D motorcycle.
Oh no, it's still under the member channel.
Oh, member channel. Okay, yeah, I'm in. Oh, okay. It's the one of these shapes,
Yes.
the value.
Yeah. The
Okay.
value. And he has a bunch of questions underneath that, but I think
Oh, okay. Under 1, 2, and 3.
yes, 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Should I read it out for the rest of the people?
Yeah, you can read it out. Yeah.
Okay, number 1. At Naughty Dog, I see various architecture styles. Do you have to study all those things about various architecture and stuff? Hell yes. That's definitely yes, because our creative director, Amy Hennig, she was really, really, really picky on the type of architecture that we had to design because she was a big history buff. So it was very specific.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Like one situation where I had to design this one structure, and I was doing a lot of research as well. And then when I showed her the sketch, she could right away tell that, oh, that this is 100 years off. Like you're 100 years like too far, right?
Oh,
So I was like, holy crap, are you kidding
awesome.
me?
Yeah.
Yeah, but so yeah, we did have to study architecture, and that time when I first joined Naughty Dog, it was something that was very kind of exciting, but also very challenging because I've been doing sci-fi for a long time,
Right.
so I never really had to do any historical stuff or time period art designs. So Naughty Dog was a really educational time, and yeah, I did have to study all these architecture, and thankfully, like someone had already like gathered all the references that we need to follow, so that helped a lot. But yeah, it was very specific for sure. Okay, number 2. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's
Yes,
a good answer. Yeah.
2. Do you concept artists do a lot of crunch time? Because I assume that concept artists work gets over before the others start for the prop artists and environmenters.
So
Uh,
yeah, I think the question is like, once the concept art is past the pre-production stage, what do you guys do?
we just sit around and laugh at other people because they're gonna crunch.
Yeah, good viable question.
No, we're always on supporting the levels. So even though we do a lot of pre-production and we have a lot of prop designs already done, there's always something to be designed because especially for environments,
Yeah.
like there's so much stuff to design. Crunch time depends on a studio. So Naughty Dog, yes, for sure. That's Naughty Dog is probably very well known for crunch.
Yeah.
14-hour days, right? So I'll literally like see people when I leave. I see people they're still there, and then when I come in the morning, I see the same person again. So that person didn't leave that night, or they only got a few hours of sleep and come back. So yeah, you do crunch a lot, depending on it's all up to management and how well they manage too, right? So if it's like a studio with bad management, then and they don't scope things properly, then yeah, you will crunch. Sometimes because there's too much content, right? It's just something that's unavoidable, unfortunately. Or sometimes crunch time happens when people keep adding content in the last minute. They don't lock down the content. So it's like, oh, what do we have? This extra area. So and we're like, oh man, that means gotta like design another area, which would take a lot of time. But in an ideal world, usually concept artists would take a month or two to kind of flesh out the overall vision of the levels, and also flesh out, pretty much answer all the questions that, like what I said before, answer all the questions for the 3D artists, because what happens is that once we finish all the concepts, the pre-production and also the production concepts, once we hand it off to them, ideally they shouldn't have too many questions. They might have some questions about color and stuff, but ideally they should look at it and say, okay, I know how to build this thing, right? So that's when you know that you did your job pretty well. if they start coming back and asking, oh, I don't understand how this works, how does this fit into this, and so forth, then that might be a problem. And that's when you might have to work a little bit more to kind of solve that. Another time, another situation is where, so in game development, nothing's very rosy. Things always change and they're always moving. So even though you perfectly did all the concepts and all the production concepts and stuff, things that might get cut or they might get changed drastically, and you gotta go back to the drawing board and redesign the area. So yeah, that could lead to crunch as well. So, but normally, like if you really like figure things out early on, and the studio gives you enough time to figure things out, ideally you shouldn't have to crunch. I know at Amazon we never, I've been there for 4 years. We never had a crunch. Maybe I worked late for maybe till 8 o'clock at night. That's like nothing, right? So that's probably the latest crunch I had. I think for the engineers, yeah, they might have to crunch because they have to figure out troubleshoot problems. But concept art is generally pretty. It's a good. It can be a good work-life balance. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or.
That sounds great. I think we'll go ahead and just end it with the third question because we're during that time.
I mean, I could go a little bit over if you want.
Oh,
it's fine.
No, there's
go for me 10 more minutes.
Yeah. Let's see. Did you answer the last one?
No, I didn't. Do you overwork during the start of project? That's kind of related to the second question. Yeah. Do you have to be well versed in different styles? And any future workshops for us? Okay, so second one. Do you have to be well versed in different styles? Yes and no. This is a tricky one. So there's some artists out there, some concept artists that are really good at one particular style and one particular things. So if you look at ArtStation, I'm trying to think of an artist on top of my head. Like if you look at some of these sci-fi based concept artists, like all they do is sci-fi, right? But they're really good at it. So because they're really good at it, they make a brand for themselves. And that's how they, so they always get called for sci-fi based jobs, anything that's hard surface or environments. And then there's some concept artists that are good at doing everything. And that's not a bad thing too, because let's say like if your studio has multiple projects, one that may be more stylized, like for Amazon, we have a stylized project and we have a pretty realistic project. So let's say like if the other team wants to borrow you and you can do both, that's great because now you have more things to do, job security, right? So that's always a good thing. And I always err towards being more adaptive to different styles because you never know, right? Because sometimes, like for example, like for a breakaway, again, we had five pivots. 3 of them were different art pivots. One was the first iteration was really stylized. Like it was almost like 2 points, very cartoony, very very exaggerated proportions. Characters were like really, chunky and round. And then we had another pivot where they wanted something to be more realistic. So more realistic proportions, but still stylized. So in order to adapt to go from that environment to a more realistic environment, that's where having a wide range does help as well. And I always believe like if you're more marketable in terms of being more versatile, I think that's a much stronger push. So, and also you learn a lot from doing both different styles as well, because stylized is actually really hard to do because I think realistic is much easier because you have a lot of people photo bash, right? So And also, realistic proportions is much easier to tackle than stylized, because stylized, you're reducing something that's very realistic to something really simple. And to do that, that's really hard. At that point, that's pretty much all design at that point, right? Where something that's more realistic, you could look at references. Not to bash on any artists that do realistic stuff, but I'm just saying, like, all the references are there for you to kind of get there faster. Where stylized, you have to really develop and figure out what works for the direction of the game. Because sometimes, for example, let's say you're playing League of Legends, right? Top-down view. A realistic figure like Call of Duty or something would never work because the proportions are so minuscule that it's going to be really hard to see. It's going to blend into everything else. That's why a lot of games like League, Dota, and all those other games are very stylized, because you're looking from a top-down view. So you have to see your characters pretty clearly. So in order to do that, you have to exaggerate the proportions, right? And shapes, so that you could recognize, oh, okay, that's that character versus that character, right? And also the color helps as well. So that's why a lot of the top-down games are much more stylized, right? So so it's good to be versatile, to really accommodate, and plus you'll be more marketable in the job too, right? If you do that. But I would say specialize and be really strong in what you're doing. Like, for example, environments or characters. Some people could do both really well, but a lot of people usually are really strong in environments and or characters. So focus on what you like to do, and if you're really passionate about what you're really good at, then that's going to show, and that's going to really excel your skills faster, rather than just trying to struggle in doing a particular style that you're not really happy with, because that's not really you, right? So
sweet. All right, so that wraps up exactly an hour. I want to thank you, Brian, for doing this for us. A lot of these students are primarily like 3D environment or lighters. We haven't done a concept art track yet. Something maybe we could talk about later. But
okay.
Now this is them giving a stab at it. I'm glad you guys showed up. Asked a lot of good questions. Hopefully you guys find this useful. For the people who didn't join us live, hopefully you guys got your questions answered. And we thank you, Brian.
Okay. Also, to answer that last question, future workshops. Maybe if I
have time,
get a chance. Yeah, have time.
Yeah, of course. All right, guys. I'll see you.
All right. Thank you, guys. All right. Good night.